Hi all, thank you all for coming tonight. This is Dr. McGuffog and Helene DeHaan, and I'm Marissa Mercatante, the co-presidents of SEPTA. We'd like to just introduce Dr. McGuffog. She's going to talk about the graduation requirements in high school for students with disabilities, and I really appreciate her coming out tonight to do this for us, and we're going to videotape it, and it'll be on the SEPTA website as well.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a lot of information to cover because there have been so many changes in education. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I would say in the past 2 years we're just getting bombarded, and you've heard about some of them with Common Core standards and APPR, and then a while ago we had the change in the format of the IEP, and now we're really just getting so bombarded that truthfully there are still some things that are still up in the air that will probably come out sometime next month, but I will bring you at least up to date to where we are today. So I just wanted to quickly review what are typical New York State high school graduation requirements. So there are your credits. Can everybody see okay if you can? Okay. So 4 credits in English, 4 in social studies, 3 in mathematics, 3 in science, 0.5 in health, 1 in the arts, 1 in a foreign language, 2 in physical education, and 3.5 electives, and you need a total of 22 credits, okay? So that is sort of a standard graduation requirement. As you know, in terms of languages other than English, if you are a student with a disability and it's indicated on your IEP that you are language exempt, you would not have to fulfill that requirement, and you could make it up down in the electives area. So aside from that, though, you need to fulfill all of these graduation requirements to get either a local, a Regents, or a Regents diploma with distinction. So these are your minimum high school requirements. Within that, here are the list of the different New York State regents that are available, and I have to say this is such a moving target that if you go on the state website, they still have listed the foreign language regents, which they ran out of money and can't do anymore. So this is what is going to be given in June of 2013. You have with the English. Within mathematics, you have integrated algebra, geometry, and then algebra 2 and trig, and a lot of the math stuff is changing. Within social studies, you have global history and U.S. history. Within science, you have earth science, living environments, which is biology, physics, and chemistry. Now, the absolute required regents are starred there, so that is your English, your integrated algebra, your global history, your U.S. history, and any one of the science. So there are other regions that are given that are not required, but in order to get a Regents diploma in New York State, you have to have passed those 5 regions that would be a grade of 65 or better, okay? So all students must earn grades of 65 on all 5 required regions in order to earn a Regents diploma. So that's how you get a Regents diploma. Okay. Now, I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you some sample, and this is where I'll need you to click on the hyperlink and hopefully. So this is the English Regents, which your student would take in junior year. And I just wanted to show you some of the sample questions in the language, because I know for some of you, you're questioning whether your student would be able to pass a Regents. What is that? I'm not sure what that is, because when I did it... Oh, I guess I have to accept, okay. Oh, at home it worked. I'm not sure why that happened.
Is there
I wasn't registered and I got in.
Let me try some more time.
I saw it. No. I wonder if you can try. I wonder if that's going to happen on all of them. That's so weird. Try just, they were actually on the New York State Ed website. I can try just Googling it maybe.
Google?
Try Google just English, New York State English Regents sample.
If there's a security for
Oh, you know what? There's probably more controls here in school than I have at home. Okay, I'm going to have to find another way to show you that, though. I will definitely get it. We'll figure it out at some point. So let me just continue, and then I'll make sure that you all get to see. Because and you can go on as well, I think, certainly I could at home, and see sample regents. And they actually had the one that was given in January 2013. Right now, the regents are given in June. It's the most typical time, August, and January, though it's always questionable whether they're going to get rid of the August one because that was actually a grant from Bloomberg, I believe, that allowed us to have the August one, which is often very important for our students if they failed the June one. Okay, so here are the regents. This is, I'm assuming the same thing is going to happen. This is your U.S. history, which is in junior year, your globals in sophomore year. The global regents is a 2-year regents. There is talk about the fact that they may change that going forward to a 1-year regents because truthfully it is one of the regents that is very difficult for many students to pass. It's a lot of, thousands of years of history, a lot of memorization over 2 years. And then you have the earth science and the living environment. So I'll see if at the end if I can get those to work. Otherwise, I'll just give you the links. So what safety net options are available for students with disabilities in order to graduate with a local diploma? Okay, so now we're done with the Regents diploma. If your student can get a Regents diploma, they would need to pass at least 5 of those Regents. So students with disabilities have a few options. We still have Regents competency tests. I'll be talking more about that, but it's being phased out. You always had what was called the safety net, which is really just passing the Regents with a 55 to a 64. So that has been an option that has been available for students with disabilities. It gets you a local diploma. It does not earn you a Regents diploma, but it does get you a high school diploma. And the New York State Education Department just added what's called a compensatory option, which they put in place in response to parent outrage, actually, about the elimination of the RCTs.
RCT is eliminated as a...
If your student entered, and I have a slide here, if your student entered 9th grade last year, then they are not eligible. So from last year on. If your student was already in 9th grade, they will be able to continue to take it through graduation. So, right. So if your student's not yet in high school, if your student's currently in high school, as long as they are currently a junior, right, they can still take it. So the RCT safety net had allowed students who fail one or more of the required Regents. So technically it was put in place as a kind of safety net for you were supposed to sit for the Regents first, and if you failed one or more of the Regents exams, and by that I mean now with less than a 55, right, because you already had the safety net. If you were a student with disability, you hadn't failed officially if you had a 55. But if you got lower than a 55, you could take one or more of these Regents competency tests. And the Regents competency tests were given in English, mathematics, global history, U.S. history, and science. So it is now only available to students entering grade 9 prior to September 2011. So that is what is being phased out. And if your student was already there, they can continue until they're 21 to continue to try to get the Regents competency test. Now let's see if this, so what I have here is I have links, hopefully that'll open, to some Regents competency tests, because I guess not.
There must be some security code that you have to...
I think it's because there are a lot of security codes in this building, which is supposed to be to protect kids, but apparently it's protecting us. So I'll figure out another way. So, but I can show you somehow. I will get you samples of Regents competency exams so that you can compare and contrast the types of questions. My experience with the two has been that the Regents competency exams measure much more concrete and basic skills, whereas the Regents really requires the integration of a lot of skills. So the Regents competency mathematics is more of a practical mathematics test where the mathematics must-have exam is the integrated algebra, which is really quite complex. I have to say, I was looking at it today and I was thinking I really could not pass that test without taking the course again. So on a personal level, it's frustrating to me because I've done quite well in my career, and I don't understand that being a must-have Regents, but it is. Okay, so the safety net I talked about already is 55 to 64. And that gets you a local diploma. So for now, what they put in as of students who are entering 9th grade, so they're actually, the interesting thing about the compensatory option is they're kind of backdating it, and you'll see a slide where actually if you didn't pass, you can come back, you can re-enroll in school, and if you are under 21, and try to sit for the exam, or I guess if your score, and I'll go through it, and somehow you're allowed to kind of go back and get a local diploma. So the difference here is that the compensatory option allows you to have a score between 45 and 54 on one or more of the 5 required Regents, but it does not include the ELA or the math. So the ELA or the math, you have to have a 55 or better. But on one or more of the others, you can have a 45. But only if you score 65 or higher on one or more of the required Regents exams, in which case the lower score can be compensated for by the higher score. Okay? So basically, if you got a 65, then you could have a 45 and you can borrow the 10 points to make it a 55, but...
Two completely different tests.
Yes. I mean, look, the reality of it was that they eliminated, the RCTs were always supposed to be a sort of stopgap measure until the state came up with a more appropriate test for a certain population of students who they referred to as 2% students who were not clearly IEP diploma students but who had difficulty passing the Regents. I have to tell you, in the 8 years that been a director, not only did they not ever develop that test that they sort of claimed that they were going to, instead what they did was they eliminated the RCTs because, as they said, they save a ton of money because they now don't have to produce, administer, or score these tests. So it really was a financial decision, in my opinion. They will say it was raising standards, but those of you who were at the forum where we did try to speak to the people from the Board of Regents and all, parents were even saying, we're not blaming the school that they're not working hard enough. We don't think our children can do this. So what's going to happen to them? So in response to a lot of sort of public outcry, it came up with this system, which obviously doesn't cost them any more money. Our poor guidance counselors are, they go out of their minds. But in my opinion, it still leaves you with the real difficulty, which is getting a 55 on that integrated algebra regions, which requires a tremendous amount of working memory because it's very multi-stepped and a lot of abstract reasoning. And again, I just don't see where that is a practical, skill. I mean, and then, not to mention, knowing thousands of years of global history, but and writing DBQs. But for some students who could, maybe get through some of the language-based regions, we have found that the integrated algebra, it's a kind of, you can either do it or you can't. And some of our students are entering, we've started giving the key math to really be able to assess students' levels of mathematics in all different areas. And, finding that some of the students can have even elementary level, basic skills. And you're just not, it's too big of a jump to go from there to the integrated algebra. So it's something I'm still very concerned about, and this little mathematical formula of borrowing 10 points does not really solve the problem. So in addition to having this, grace of being able to get a 45 and compensate with a 65, you still have to get a passing grade for the course or subject area in which the regents is given. And you have to have satisfactory attendance in accordance with the attendance policy. And you cannot already use a passing score on one or more of the RCTs to graduate with a local diploma. So you can't mix the compensatory option with the RCT option for those students who are already, with grandfathered into that RCT. So you can start using the compensatory option October 31st, 2012 to graduate with a local diploma. And now there's a whole series of questions that truthfully I found fascinating because I didn't know the answer to a lot of them. Are students who are no longer eligible for the RCT safety net eligible for the compensatory safety net if they entered grade 9 between September 2011 and October 31st, 2012, the effective date? And the answer is yes. So you can kind of go back retroactively. Can students use the compensatory safety net option if they're using the RCT option? I already said no, they can't mix them. Can students use the 55 low pass safety net option if they're using the compensatory safety net option? Yes, so you can mix the old safety net with the new compensatory option. Can students earning a score of 65 or higher or any of the required Regents examination use that score to compensate for a score between 45 and 54 in any one of the required? You cannot use a 65 or higher on one of the required Regents to compensate for a score of 45 on either math or Regents. However, you can use a score of 65 or higher on any of the Regents examinations, including the English or the math, to compensate for a 45 on another Regents. And somewhere it'll say here that, and you also can't, let me see, for purposes of receiving a local diploma, you can only do it on up to 2 required Regents. And you can't use Regents within the same area. So you can't sort of take another Regents, like another science, and then kind of use that to compensate for a science. So you may combine RCT and LOS. Okay, so that we always had. Okay, for students who successfully appealed. Now, if your child gets within 3 points of a 65, you can appeal. And if you appealed a score and got your 65, could you use that 65 to compensate for a 45? And the answer is no, because the score is not really changed to a 65. The score remains a 62, 63, or 64, so you don't really have the requisite 10 points. I mean, I didn't make it up. I'm just telling you. It's like, and I've been trying to learn this for a long time, and I still obviously don't have sort of fluency with it. Is the safety net option available to students with disabilities who are declassified? The answer is yes, and I think this is something I have, said very often to many of the parents here, that we I think do a very good job now of keeping track of declassified IEPs, making sure that those students get all of their testing accommodations, and if you are declassified in 8th grade or thereafter, then you can use the safety net option, but it does have to be indicated on the IEP. So just remember, if you're in an 8th grade meeting and someone is being declassified, you might want to put that on there. Just to make sure, since we don't really know how they're going to do. Is the safety net option available to students with disabilities who have a Section 504 plan? Yes, it could also be put on a Section 504 plan, which truthfully is something I did not know until I read this, so that was news to me. How is it determined which safety net options are available? And it depends on when you entered 9th grade. So if you entered in 2005, you can use the 55 and or the compensatory. Students who entered grade 9 prior to September 2011 can use the RCT. Students may not use the compensatory net option if they're using the RCT. So we talked about that already. Are safety net options applicable to Regents examinations to a student who has taken prior to being classified as having a disability? Yes. So it can actually be applied retroactively. Right? And is that what you would get from that? Okay. Is the local diploma available to general education students? As of 2005, general education students are not able to earn a local diploma. So that's when they phased out a local diploma for general education students, and if you are not classified, you are required to pass those 5 regions. And a lot of times the Board of Regents uses this as an example of raising standards, that once they put this into effect, lo and behold, more students passed the regents, and that was their argument anyway, that if we do the same thing for students with disabilities, we expect to have the same results. I would kind of argue that it's different because a student with a disability is, a student with a disability because they are not a general education student, because they have some kind of neurocognitive deficit. So I'm not really sure, the parallel, but they feel very strongly that this is about school districts needing to raise standards and keep standards really high, and that's why they felt comfortable kind of, eliminating the RCTs. Okay, so I talked about this. The students who falls within 3 points of attaining 65 can appeal that. Those who successfully appeal 2 required region scores may graduate with a local diploma, but if you wanted a Regents diploma, you can only appeal 1. Okay, so you can't, if you win 2 appeals, meaning that you missed it by 3 points or less, you could get a local diploma. If you just had to appeal once, you could still get a Regents diploma. Okay, so if students take 2 Regents exams in the same subject area and score 65 or higher on both exams, may each of these scores be used to compensate for scores of 45 to 54 on 2 other required Regents examinations? And the answer is no. And that is disappointing because some of our kids will have kind of splinter skills where they may be really into science and do really well. And unfortunately, they won't be allowed to use that to compensate for a weakness in another area. Yeah, so that's what I was referring to before. Students may only use one score of 65 or higher on a required Regents exam in a given subject area. The 5 required Regents examinations include, and we went over that already, may scores earned on a required Regents examination prior to October 2012 be used to meet graduation requirements using the compensatory safety net option, and it's yes. Provided the student is eligible for the option at the time of graduation. So you can kind of apply this retroactively. And is the compensatory safety net option available to students with disabilities entering grade 9 in 2005 and thereafter who are no longer enrolled in school? And this was, again, one of those like sort of shocking to me. I'm not sure like how somebody does this. Yes, provided the student is still eligible to attend school, meaning that they're under 21, and a student continues to be eligible for an appropriate public education until the end of the school year in which the student turns age 21 or until the receipt of a regular local or Regents high school diploma, whichever is earlier. But I had the sense that you could even, and I think there's one, if a student already exited school and now meets the requirements to earn a local diploma through the compensatory option, that is, the student had received a score of 66 on one required Regents and a 47 on another, must the student re-enroll in school to be awarded a diploma? Yes, once enrolled, a student may not need to take additional courses if they meet all of the graduation requirements. So that is... I mean, is anybody else as perplexed by that as I am? Like, you're going to come, you're going to sign up for school, you're going to enroll, and then your guidance counselor is going to take back, you know, is going to hand you a local diploma and say, oops, we changed it. And I mean, I guess it's good because it would be really unfair that they hadn't changed it while you were still in school, but I have to inform my guidance counselors of this because I'm sure they would think anybody was out of their mind if they showed up and said, like, hi, I'd like my local diploma now. Yes?
Scroll back one.
Sure.
So a student that's already graduated, I mean, does this amount to the fact that a student that is over 18 and may have graduated somehow or another, or not graduated, can actually continue on or can continue on in some other program outside of the school building?
Students with disabilities who are under the age of 21 are always able to come back to school, pay no tuition, as long as they did not get a diploma when they exited. So they couldn't have received a local diploma or a Regents diploma, but if they got no diploma, they can come back until they're 21 and work toward earning a diploma. So basically this is saying if you had met the requirements, but they were different then because we only had the safety net or the RCTs. I mean, I don't know why somebody wouldn't have taken the RCT. So I don't know how many people this would apply to, but they're saying if you could come back, re-enroll, and then we'll just give you your local diploma. Or you could continue to take classes and work toward that local diploma, which was always their right if students wanted to. So, does that make any sense?
Is a local diploma something that a student can enroll to college with?
Yes, a local diploma is a diploma. It is a high school diploma. So we will talk about... Okay, I think we went over all that. And you see they kind of made the math easy because they say a 65 or higher, a 54, but you can see from the other one you have to actually, if it's a 47, you have to have, so it's really 10 points. It's not going to be this simple for the guidance counselors to calculate. So the skills and achievement credential is sort of the new IEP diploma. So they also happen to change this at the same time as we sort of went through the loss of the RCTs. And, on some level, they're not supposed to be related, but in reality they are related. But a local diploma and a Regents diploma are both high school diplomas. So yes, technically you can do anything that anybody can do having earned a high school diploma. So it is a way that students with disabilities can exit high school and continue on to college and continue on to other jobs that require high school diplomas. It's considered a high school diploma.
What percent of the students last year got a local diploma versus a high school diploma, or a Regents diploma, rather? You know?
I don't think I know off the top of my head. Are you talking about just students with disabilities?
No, just in general, the whole population.
In our school?
Yeah.
I mean,
99% are getting the Regents and 1% are getting...
Yeah, I mean, a relatively small percent of our population gets local diplomas. It's typically kids who are either, I would say maybe some of our kids in modified classes and some of our kids in ISP. And the RCT, I think, made that more possible for certain students because it was more concrete.
You're expected to get the Regents diploma, but if you fail the Regents exams, you get no diploma.
Exactly. If you're a general ed student and you don't get that 65 on the 5 Regents in New York State, you do not get a high school diploma. There's no way around that. So if you're a student with a disability, then in the past you had the option of a 55 and or an RCT in an area that you didn't earn the 55. And now, as a student with disabilities, you have this option of the 65-45, but you still have the 5 Regents, and as you saw, there were still 5 Regents competency tests that the students had to pass. They did have to pass the Regents competency test in every area. It's just that the nature of the test was different, and it was not, originally designed as a high school exiting exam, which was the Board of Regents' argument, and my argument was, well, then why didn't you design one? You said you were going to. I remember I was at that presentation.
So what's the functional difference between a Regents diploma, a
local diploma,
one, and now a skills and achievement credential?
Okay, the skills and achievement credential is not considered a high school diploma. You could not use it to go to college, and you could not use it to apply to jobs that require a high school diploma. And I believe, Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, that includes the military. I assume the military requires a high school diploma. So, in terms of, life, it's a big difference. A local diploma, if you went on and you went to, you could do anything that you're capable of doing. Typically kids who would get a local diploma would go to a 2-year college and, maybe a community college and kind of start, with a little bit, with more support. But technically they could go to a 4-year college. They can, go anywhere that they're accepted. So this is what used to be called the IEP diploma, and this is now called a skills and achievement credential. And this is beginning in 2013-14 school year. They have amended the IEP diploma to a skills and achievement commencement credential. And this is for students who are New York State alternatively assessed. Okay? So these are for students with significant disabilities who are getting New York State alternative assessment. I'm not sure if, let's see if that one works. And that shouldn't be a site, but we'll see.
But what if you're not in the alternatively assessed category?
It doesn't like any of these things.
Sorry about that. It never occurred to me.
Isn't alternatively assessed when you don't have a test?
If you're not, well, that's a good question, and I don't know that anybody has the answer to that. And actually, what I was going to show you is the age, for when we do alternative assessment. When I spoke to people up at the state about this, and I said, you're just going to end up with forcing me to give more students, at that time, IEP diplomas. They said, oh, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to, try to get them to pass the Regents, and then when they don't, just give them an IEP diploma. So I'm kind of like, okay, well, so then what am I supposed to call them? Like that, then they're going to be dropouts? Like, that's not happening. So I haven't figured out yet, and I'm being taped, I haven't really figured out the way around this, because, this then sort of implies that once you're on one track, you can't change. So I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, because this is so new. We really haven't had a cohort yet go through, and we haven't really seen what the impact of this is going to be on the options for students with disabilities. So, and I apologize for this inability to. Okay, so the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential provides alternatively assessed students who are exiting school after attending. You have to attend for at least 12 years, excluding kindergarten, in order to get a Skills and Achievement Credential, with a commencement certificate similar in form to the diploma issued by the school district. And actually, if you go on, they actually have a picture. Their whole thing is it has to look like the same as a high school diploma, but it must be accompanied by documentation of the student's skills and strengths and levels of independence in academic, career development, and foundation skills needed for post-school living, learning, and working. But somewhere it will say that, but it needs to clearly state that it's not a high school diploma. So,
if you choose at third grade level to have your child alternatively assessed, does that mean that they're not going to have any shot at a college school diploma?
That's a great question. Oh, Joanne, did you come to help me figure out how to get around the security system?
I'm going to go back to the next slide so that we can get the web here.
I can't get any of the hyperlinks to open. Sorry. Okay. The way... What I've been doing here so far is that the students who are in ISP, who are, whether they're sort of, borderline between or even just would benefit from being in modified classes, are sitting in the modified classes. Now, the modified classes in high school are designed to end with the Regents, okay? That is the goal, is for all of those students to take the Regents. The modified classes are aligned with the Common Core, meaning that we're following the curriculum. So if your student pushes into a modified class with support from ISP, because ISP staff will then do another level of modification for that student, they can certainly take the Regents, and they should be prepared to take the Regents. So I've been kind of hedging it both ways, and then for some of those students who didn't pass the Regents, then we gave them the RCTs. So now that only makes sense if your student is going to get anything at all out of the class. If your student's going to sit there for 42 minutes in an integrated algebra class and have absolutely no idea what the teacher is talking about, then I would really encourage you to let us come up with some other class that would be more appropriate, because we certainly have other requirements other than the academic requirements. And if in fact it's clear that the student's not going to pass a Regents, to sit in every one of the Regents classes will detract from something else that the child could be doing that could be more appropriate. So But we do give the students, certainly in 9th and 10th grade, every opportunity to participate in as academic a program as makes sense for them. Does that answer your question?
So what would be an example of more appropriate if a child isn't going to benefit from sitting in a Regents track class? What's a more appropriate option?
Well, I mean, the thing is, if you spend all of your time just kind of trying over and over and over again to pass these Regents, it leaves less time for things like learning activities of daily living, eventually job coaching, internships. I mean, we only have a certain amount of time in the day. So if your students takes, for example, we have an integrated algebra class for students with disabilities, and it's spread out over 2 years. So we are trying to give the child every opportunity to be able to pass that class. But again, that's it's 2 years of a credit each year. If you spend an inordinate amount of time taking and retaking classes that are academic in nature, it won't go through. Then you're not going to. You'll have less time to do other, tasks. So we typically keep. Community-based, I'm sorry, I think I stepped out of my range here. If I go over here, am I okay or no? Stay here? Okay. Any kind of community-based instruction, activities of daily living. We do vocational, we do job coaching in the high school. We would have some other math classes that are more like a more functional math class. So things that would be perhaps more practical and more useful for them in their lives, they would have less opportunity to access if we just keep banging away at Regents-based classes. If it's, and not to mention, I've certainly seen, students react with a lot of frustration, because if you can imagine going through a whole day and just understanding, an eighth or a quarter of what is being talked about, some of these classes are really, quite high level, even in the modified class where we use smart boards and we break things down and the language is simpler. The content, and I'm sorry I can't show you what the Regents looks like. I think that gives a better example of the flavor of what I'm talking about in terms of the level of abstraction, that if the child's going to sit there all day and have no idea, what's going on, they could be better suited. We also do English language arts. We could maybe work more intensively on reading. Now, reading is not part of the curriculum in the high school. So if you're in an ELA class, the expectation is that, you can read and write and you're going to pass an English Regents. Your student might do better working in the ISP room on basic reading skills or math skills or activities of daily living, and still have opportunities to integrate into any classes that they would benefit from and that are appropriate for them.
So I guess really where I'm going with that line of questioning, though, is, so what's the end game for a child who is, might have been appropriate, who would now get this new IEP.
The skills and achievement.
And is not going to have a diploma. What is the future for a child who, really, that's why we are all here, right? What is the real future for a child who doesn't get a high school diploma and who can't get a job that requires a high school diploma? But who is, let's say, functional on enough levels that they would actually be good workers or be able to do something. That's my mother head. What's going to happen to my kid?
I don't disagree with you. Part of the requirements of the skills and achievement, and they're just going to shut that down to see if they can get me out of this security lock, but part of the requirements of the skills and achievement credential is transition planning, which involves internship opportunities, job coaching, and as well as hooking students up with adult service provider agencies. So the hope would be that if a student is not able to earn a high school diploma, that student would be eligible for OPWDD, Office with Persons with Developmental Disability Services, so that they would continue to get support. So, because, yes, I mean, I would agree with you. It would be, without it, to just graduate with a skills and achievement credential, not hooked up with any other agency, it would be difficult for a student to get a job. So we will give them opportunities during the time that they're in high school to work at different internships, to work on soft skills of interviewing, writing a resume, how does one behave, punctuality, showing up on time, properly dressed, how does one interact, as well as exposing them to, and if I get back in there, I'll show you my career and
Just out of curiosity, with those students who have graduated with IEP diplomas, have you tracked, let's say for the last 5 years, what percentage have full-time or part-time employment?
it's a good question, and I can't say that I have.
Not you personally, but I mean, someone in the district.
No.
This is the cohort for graduation this
Yeah.
There's nobody ahead.
That's the first group. Okay.
Yeah.
So then the answer is right, no.
I mean, we had other students who had been, typically students, we've always had students who got IEP diplomas here. They typically went to BOCES programs. And truthfully, even though I worked here, I didn't really see them that much. I barely knew what they were doing when they were in school, never mind when they left school. But if you are hooked up with what used to be OPWDD, now I've gotten so used to calling it that.
Office of Mental Retardation.
OMRDD, presumably they would sort of take over where the school district left off in terms of providing opportunities for supported employment, living independently. So again, a lot of it would be dependent upon, how much parents kind of followed through on things, how effective BOCES was at providing that support. I know some of the programs were better than others, just in terms of, hooking students up, parents up.
What percentage do you think of the current population that we have now, do you think will be ineligible for college due to the loss of the RCTs? In other words, if we still had the RCTs, they would have gotten a local high school diploma and been able to qualify for college. What do you think that percentage is?
I don't know that I know the answer to that, but I can tell you that years ago when I heard Becky Court first start to talk about this issue, she referred to these kids as the 2%ers who were, so I think she felt it was about 2% of the total population of students with disabilities who, even in terms of them taking the ELA test, and you all know what that is like, how long those in your grades 4 through 8 tests, taking those ELA and the math tests, where she kind of conceded that those tests are really not appropriate for certain students, but we need to have some way of assessing their growth. And then truthfully what happened was, I think budget, crises came along and nobody ever developed a more appropriate test, so they just kind of got lost, is my opinion. People may argue that position, but I never saw that test, and all of a sudden it became about the fact that we weren't holding them to high enough standards, rather than that we didn't have tests that were appropriate to be able to assess their growth. I am concerned that there are, students who would have been able to pass an RCT that would not be able to pass a Regents, who may not qualify for OPWDD services because they're also money is tight, and they're finding more and more reasons, not to provide services. So, yes.
Was the assumption with the school, with the Board of Education, that if you could not get a high school diploma, that you would automatically qualify for OPWC and that you would be taken care of by the state and federal government,
I'm sorry, was the assumption by whom?
by the education board, that it was kind of a clear cut, you were either going to be covered by state and federal government for the rest of your life under OPWD, or that you would get a diploma and you'd go off and become independent.
I don't know.
Kind of like what they were trying to do is put that separation there.
I think that they would say that they're raising standards, that they're raising academic standards. I don't know that they would, I do think that they would argue that it's our job to get the students to the highest level that they're, capable of working. I don't know that they would argue that they, my concern is that are they creating more students who would need, support? But I don't know that they would agree with that, so I can't really speak for them. Eileen?
Since New York State's the only state with the regions, do other, like Connecticut, New Jersey, do they have problems like this with students with special needs getting a regular diploma? Because it seems very unfair that New York is almost penalizing these students.
That is a good question.
Yes. And no, they don't have the same issues. It really is rooted.
All the states have exit exams?
I just know that Connecticut doesn't. I don't know all of the states that do.
And I think it's a problem for certain segment of students with disabilities.
So is the solution that you move to Connecticut, in senior year, or you put your kid in a private school for a year, so they graduate from that school? I mean, it's a terrible thing in my mind.
I agree. I don't know that I have, the solution. I can only say that what we're going to do here is continue. I think at least what's unique about our programs is that the students can continue to be exposed to the Common Core. We do have the modified classes. I can tell you, if their only option was to push into a mainstream class, there would really be no chance because the level of conversation, of language, of sentence structure is just, so advanced. So I think we have one of the best shots of anywhere, which is why our high school program is as popular as it is. We are known for having taken students who came to us as alternatively assessed students from other districts and gotten them RCT diplomas, local diplomas. So I think what we're doing works as well as anything can work. And truthfully, for me, that's the frustration in speaking to the New York State Education Department, because the implication on their end is you're just lazy and not trying hard enough on behalf of these students, or you're just not doing it right. And I'm like, I even said to them, please come down and see my program and tell me what you think I could be doing additionally. I'd like you to meet some of the students who I'm concerned about and tell me what I should do differently in order to be able to help them to meet these academic standards. I do think it's possible that one thing that might happen, and I don't know for 100% sure, but when you hear the fact that they're going to reduce the global regents to 1 year instead of 2, I think they might be getting a little nervous that some of the regents' exams might be too difficult, and that they might perhaps dummy them down a little bit for everybody in hopes that more students can get through and this doesn't become, such an apparent error. But I really don't know. I mean, I do know that one of the regents did acknowledge that they saved a tremendous amount of money by eliminating another test. Just as, look, much of this makes no sense because you realize the teachers are being evaluated on standardized test scores, and at the same time, they eliminated many standardized tests, right? We have no more foreign language regents. We have the science. I mean, there's so many tests that they took away at the same time that they were saying we're going to use standardized tests as part of teacher evaluation. And the decisions have been solely based on finances. They didn't take away exams because they don't believe in high-stakes testing, obviously. They're still making it, the end game for high school. So,
Do you think that there's anything that parents can do to get this changed?
I mean, there was a lot of parent input. I think you can always, organize and advocate. My sense at this point is it's a done deal. This, I think, was the compromise, this 50, 45, 65 thing. But, I certainly would encourage you to continue trying. And the other side of this, though, is that you do have to be practical in terms of who your child is. So you don't want to win the battle and lose the war. So, great, they come out with a local diploma, and as I said, they don't have any of the other skills. They still can't hold a job. Just because they have a local diploma and could possibly, get a job doesn't mean that they're going to be successful at that job. So, some people would argue that sometimes we overly support the kids here and somewhat inflate what they are capable of doing, and that when they leave and don't have that level of support, are they going to be able to function independently? So, it is a balance. Okay, sorry. It's a balance, and you do have to be realistic about what your student is capable of doing. We also work, I think, and we've started at the younger grades now, with the parents to make sure that they are applying for all of the support that they are eligible to receive. So that is something that I think in the past, a lot of times the school districts, again, it was almost depending on how good the BOCES program was, whether anybody would even, really work with the parent. I know that Greg Kemp has started all the way down in elementary school to try to get students hooked up with Office with Persons with Developmental Disabilities. We do additional testing to try to support you in that endeavor. Again, I can't promise you that you would get that level of support, but certainly if you graduate with a skills and achievement diploma, it would be, I think, essential to have some other support back there.
So for a kid, so I've been trying to get my child, extra support through that office for years, and they keep declining her, based on like 1 point. So I'm incredibly worried that she would be one of those kids who would end up with the new thing, the skills and
I'll get there.
credential, and still not, so now she's got, a credential that isn't much of a credential at all, and is still not able to get the support because she's somehow, the language they use, too adaptable. I mean, what is that child, what happens then? Short of like, I make $1 billion and leave a trust fund.
I don't know that I have an answer. I hear what you're saying, and I know people. My husband's a lawyer. I know he's I'm not I know people have hired lawyers. I know one case he had where he actually had the young lady come into court, and only then, after they sort of met her, they was, sort of like, it's like a horrible thing to have to do, but say like, well, would you give her a job? Do you think she could do a job? So it is something that has been going on for a long time. And obviously, that battle has preceded this elimination of the RCTs. It is also, truthfully, a big problem for our students with emotional disabilities. And they have, truthfully, even less support than students with cognitive disabilities once they leave here. We tend to create this very supportive environment, and getting services through Office of Mental Health is even more difficult, and they have less to offer typically than Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities. So, I don't know that I can kind of solve all of those issues. I just wanted to make sure that you were all at least informed, because I feel like this is all going on. And truthfully, I have felt somewhat out of the loop in this because there has been so much that has been going on in education that in the past when it was one issue, you could go and BOCES would have trainings and you would, hear. Now it's like you can't go to enough trainings because there's so much happening that I think that this is also kind of not getting talked about as much as it might have at another time.
Have you heard of the latest idea from the state of New York for the park standardized testing, where it's at each grade level? And it's on the core, and my understanding from this morning is that it would be in place of the regions, so they would actually do away with the regions and have these park tests at every grade level. Do you think that would be better for students with disabilities?
I have no idea. I mean, the other thing that's on the table is that by a certain date that all school districts have to do all of the standardized testing on computers. And so that alone, I mean, if you were at the work session, about the budget last night, that it'll be really interesting to see where we get the money to make sure that we have enough computers. And I can tell you, I had some of you know that my son is dyslexic and has ADHD, and he just went in to take his GMATs, and it's completely computerized, and I thought, oh, that's great because he's such a computer person, that's going to work out terrific. And instead what happened was that the other thing I learned is that once you start a computer test, you can't stop it, you can't save it, you can't switch computers. So he happened to be taking the test next to a person who had Tourette's, and he had a throat clearing thing, and here's my son who can't screen out any distractibility, and it's so funny to hear him talk about it because he's like, and I kept saying, like, I'm not going to pay attention to it, and then like all of a sudden he'd be like, I wonder if the guy's okay. I haven't heard the throat clearing in a while. And he'd be like, I have to like check and make sure. Like, he's like, so I was distracted if it was noisy or if it was quiet because I just couldn't stop thinking about his throat clearing. So I said, why didn't you just ask if you could move where you were sitting? And he said, I couldn't. He had to cancel his score. Because you couldn't just move to another, computer station. So, a problem I wouldn't even have anticipated when you start getting, and you could see tonight how frustrating this is. That it never occurred to me that I couldn't get into, So I can see there'll be just a whole host of other problems that'll be brought up with the computer. But I have no idea how difficult the park testing is. Or, Eileen?
You alluded to this before, and I don't know if you have the answer, but say you have a student who is trying to stay on that Regents type track, and so 9th and 10th grade they try, and it just becomes pretty clear to everyone that this isn't working out. Would there still be enough time in 11th grade for them to switch to that other track of getting the credential one, or is that what the state was telling you, well, you can't just switch them over?
I don't know that I know the answer. When I was making up this PowerPoint, I was thinking that I really needed to check out what when they were saying that you have to be New York State alternatively assessed. I mean, I guess, and with regard to the question, I know that if you were being alternatively assessed, let's say in middle school, and then you wanted to switch, as I said, we've done that with students. If you wanted to become, state assessed, we have done that and haven't had any problems with it. I guess, Kathleen, the New York State assessment goes up to 18, so I would guess that as long as the student...
I think yes, because at any point...
But it may be as long as they're under 18, but I am going to find out. When I was doing this, I wasn't comfortable with that part of the law.
This is new, so I don't know, but I know they could always, in the past, try and then...
Right, but I just wonder how long how long you can try for, because you have to have enough, you have to have the New York State alternative assessments. And I mean, as I said, when I said like, oh, well then I'm going to try, and then instead of letting them be a high school dropout, I'm going to give them a skills and achievement, I was kind of saying like, I'm going to get over, and they were like, no, you can't do that. That's not what the intent is. The intent is...
that you have an IEP diploma.
Right.
If you didn't pass the Regents, which is what you would get
So I don't know, but I am going to find out. So
Sort of the opposite view of that, or turning it around. If a student comes into ninth grade and clearly, they're sort of on the borderline, but you're feeling that they're not going to be able to come up to these standards for the Regents. Is there any thought of giving them some sort of intensive remediation for a year to see whether they could then be switched into the Regents track, since the students can stay more than 4 years in a high school? In other words, if you feel like a student might have that potential to do the Regents, would you consider giving them a year of remediation and more of a individualized program in some of the foundations to see if they could then move into some of the Regents classes?
well, most of the students have a resource room. I mean, it's very hard. It depends on how big the gap is, and if it's in every area. You can't do.
Well, say like it's not in every area. It's in, the math and reading.
Well, if it was in math, then they would take the 2-year math class. I mean, they have to work then with then they'd have to work with a content area teacher. So no, I couldn't get a content area teacher to just work intensively with one student.
No, that's totally.
So.
I'm just saying I wasn't.
Well, but if let's say they don't have the basic skills in math, that they could get an ISP and they could work on it and work on it. Now, my concern is that presumably that's what we are already doing.